Welcome back to Box 2 with myself, Jamie Jones-Buchanan, in partnership with Best Western Hotels GB, and want you to know that you can find the very best deals by booking direct with them online at bestwestern.co.uk, supporting independent local hotels. Now we've got a very, very special guest in Box 2 this week, somebody who I go a long way back, the former Leeds Rhinos head coach, Tony Smith, who in my mind was the catalyst behind a lot of the success behind the golden generation 20 years ago, winning our first grand final. I think in about 36 years at the time. 32 years in living memory. And Tony, it's interesting because my oldest boy was 18 last week, right? And it's a truth that he wasn't even alive when we experienced those things, and certainly for me it was like the start of something really special. But it doesn't seem that long ago either. A lot of water's passed under the proverbial bridge for you since in that life journey, but how important is that 2004 memory in terms of your life experiences?
Yeah, it's up there. It's certainly up there in rugby league terms and coaching terms, but probably life development terms as well. Yeah. And you know, that was the first real big success. There was plenty of other successes before that that I'd like to think that I'd had, but in terms of winning something and doing something pretty extraordinary, really. For the, you know, having been 32 years since the club had done something quite that big, they were on their road and on the pathway. You're saying a catalyst. I was one of the members of being a part of the catalyst. You know, there's so many aspects of you know, success, and so many cogs that need to be put in place even before I got there. You know, you guys were in a pretty good place when I got to the club, and you know, that made it easier and quicker to get some of that success. When I came, I felt like there was going to be success, and I feel that at each club that I go to and each club that I coach. I think it's just a matter of time, how long it takes. And for us to do it in the first year, you know, that's really down to all the hard work that had been done before I got to the club, plus all the hard work that you guys put in during that period of time, and how quickly you bought into some of the things that needed to be tweaked for you guys to be successful and for the club to be as successful as it wanted to be.
You're right, there'd been a lot of seeds planted in a metaphorical sense, and we've come through with a generation of players who started to mature into young adults. And I think looking back at the squad, there was 10 of that 17 by my recollection that come through the academy system. So when you're coming in there, and we'll get into how you arrived at Headingley at the Rhinos, when you're coming in with that sort of, let's say, demographic, that group of players, and where they are in that stage of their career, how exciting was it for you? What were the optics around that in your mind?
Oh, massive. Yeah, I was so excited. Yes, about the young talent, but I just felt, and proved to be correct, that there was just a great blend of experience here too. Some really good pros. So there were some really good experienced players here, as well as the excitement of the young guys coming through, you know. And sometimes it takes ages to get that chemistry right, usually, you know. And you know, when I came in, I think in 04, I think there was only 2 changes in that year. One was Marcus Bai,
yeah,
and one was me. You know, I think we were the only 2 new signings for 2004, if my memory stands me correctly. A few rounds in, or halfway through that season, maybe not halfway, but Ali Lauatiti became available, and we added him to the mix as well, I think, if I recollect correctly. But so there wasn't huge change, probably just a bit of change at the top, and a bit of, so for me it was, you know, tweaking some of the stuff that needed to be tweaked rather than starting with a totally new culture. But yeah, I was excited, I was, you know, grateful, I thought it was a great opportunity, and you know, to work with some extra talented people that I thought were going to be talented for a long time.
Yeah. And that helps. And at 37 years old as well, it's a fair bit of intuition, because you've been on a journey yourself. And listen, I'm 43, so 37 to me is a long time ago, and I'd have been terrified in that situation where you're at there. And coming in, what is it that you're sort of believing in based on your prior experience of what you wanted to develop first in that squad?
Yeah, well, it was get to know the people first. You know, I needed to get to know the individuals and what made each person tick.
Yeah.
You know, that was part of it. But, you know, I'd made some observations rugby league wise, and, you know, prior to coming, and did a lot of homework. And you know, I'd been at Huddersfield Giants for the previous few seasons, so I got to watch Leeds Rhinos and saw what their strengths and weaknesses were, and had a hunch about some things. But I had to get in and get to know the people involved, and then what the chemistry was in amongst it. And, you know, on the whole, it was pretty strong. Well, I'm pretty strong, but, you know, there were some things that we needed to tweak. I don't know, and they're minor things, but they end up being fairly big things.
Yes.
But, you know, just having the right sort of respect for one another, be competitive by all means, because, you know, we had a lot of players that could and were all capable to play each week and get picked each week, and some didn't, as you know. And I think, yeah, well, somebody told me, and I'm not sure if this is right, but somebody told me that we didn't pick the same team twice except for the last 2 games of the season. Now, that wasn't pre-orchestrated. Some of that would have been due to injury, but some of that was having talent that, unless you were doing your job, somebody was going to come in and take your job. You know, you had to perform. We had to perform in order to keep our jobs. You know, there was that pressure, but also luxury as a coach, because it keeps people on their toes. They have to perform, and it wasn't just a case of, oh, if you had one bad game, you're out. You had a chance to, you know, maintain your position and take your position and keep your position. And if you're doing the job, you keep it. If you're not, I think one of the lines I used, Jonesy, at one of the training sessions was, you know, I don't really care too much about your past.
Yeah.
It's what you're doing now that counts. And just because you've got a reputation or you've done something big in the past, that's not enough to carry you too far.
Yes.
It carries you a little bit, but you still got to produce. You can't just rely on what you've done in the past. So everybody bought into that, and everybody was I think bought into being respectful of one another and respecting each other's ideas and opinions. But the other thing that I just felt before I got here, and I think I was proven right possibly by having some success, we had to toughen up. We had to toughen up, just, pardon me, both in terms of physically but mentally. You know, when I used to say to you, you show it too much. When you're under pressure or when you're tired, and we got into the body language kind of things. And are you going to show that you're tired? Are you going to show everybody, you know? Remember the no hands on hips, no hands on your head, and, you know, squatting down and sitting down. We didn't sit down in the gym when we were at work. It was all about having that mental toughness, and I felt that was a missing ingredient. And fortunately, you guys were brought into it and became very, very good at it, and understood that needed a change, and were prepared to make those changes. And I think it had some contribution towards us becoming that strong team, strong enough to win a competition.
Active listening is a skill that I'm trying to really develop in my own mind, and I'm listening there, and I've probably made about 4 or 5 different notes. The mental toughness bit, you know, it's interesting that stays with you. It becomes almost a habit, and you've got to keep training it, by the way, muscle memory. But My boys did some running at the weekend, and I went out with them, and they were doing some interval training, and at the end of it, two of my boys are bent over, their hands on their knees, and they're looking tired. I'm like, what are you doing? Get up, you've got to stick your chest out. Sometimes you've got to manufacture that enthusiasm, and some are really good at that. I remember Richie Mathers, one of the most animated at the back there, getting everybody to believe that they're in really good nick. You talk about developing characters, getting to know the people. I remember in the gym on a morning, you come in, look everybody in the eye, shake their hands, good morning, how are you? And I don't know what you were reading into that 2 or 3 seconds. Easter, you bring in a little egg, an Easter egg, and I continued to do that when I was coaching in the academy. I used to bring bigger Cadbury's cream eggs. Conditioner weren't very happy about it, but those little bits of skill there, and just for those who don't know, because you don't know what you don't know, we're obviously talking to Tony Smith, and I think about 650 games experience worth in Super League. Very humble, wouldn't acknowledge that you are, in many people's eyes, including myself, like a coaching guru in that respect. You're going to shake your head and go, no, I'm a developer, hopefully, of people, but you've got a massive amount of lived experience. Now, you don't think about your past, but you have come from an origin. Your brother Brian Smith, well-known coach, we all know Rowan Smith really well, a nephew. So give me a bit of an insight into what created that 37-year-old Tony Smith that came in at 2004 with all those confidences and those little nuances that helped to challenge and help people grow.
Yeah, I think it's part of it's been growing up, and in the way you're nurtured. Yeah. Very lucky to have a great upbringing and loving parents, and I had a mother who was very doting on her children, and loved everybody really. She was one of those people that give you a hug and a kiss when you came to our house, whether she knew you or not. It's just she was the real extra caring sort of person that's had an influence on all the Smith family, I would suggest. But my father was a bit not opposite, but he was a bit different. He didn't show his emotions as much, and he was no nonsense sort of bloke. Just didn't talk much. But when he said something, it was usually pretty good, and it's sort of in terms of he didn't waste his words. He was man of few words, but he was I grew up on a dairy farm, and hard-working dairy farm, no days off on a dairy farm. I'm not talking about a big, flash dairy farm. It was your feet are in the muck of a morning, and it was a hard-working. It was hard slog in those days too. I had to work on the family farm. My older brothers and sisters, you mentioned Brian, he's the eldest in our family. He's 13 years my senior. I've got a sister 12 years older, and I've got a brother 10 years older. They'd all left home, and I was on the farm. So I was basically brought up as an only child, except at Christmas when they'd come home to visit. So I'd have to work on the farm, and I think there's many things about that I'm grateful for. Really am. It was tough work, and had to get up and do the chores, and there was nobody else to do it. And on a dairy farm, for people that don't know, the cows have got to be milked twice a day, full stop, 365. And we weren't a family that could hire somebody to do, the milking on a weekend or. So if I was off playing rugby league, Mum would have to take me. Dad would be home on his own doing the whole lot by himself. So my parents made a whole lot of sacrifices for me to be able to play my sport and develop, which I'm very grateful for. But part of it, Jonesy, I often talk about this when I do some of my leadership talks, and it's helped me. Observation. I like the listening. That's a big one. Listening is really important for us coaches and us leaders and of people. But watching, observing, and I learnt many of those skills from being on the farm and from my father, because he knew every little personality of every cow and animal on our farm. He knew when they were sick. He knew when they were off colour. He knew when they weren't quite themselves, just by observation. Couldn't talk to them. They can't talk to you. So you've got to watch, you've got to observe. I'm going to relate that back to, I don't know whether you can remember me standing in the gym. I used to watch you guys all the time. I love watching my team train. I love watching them interact with each other. I can tell so much about what's going on, who's feeling good, who's on top of their game, who's feeling down, who's a bit, off colour. And so I'm grateful of some of that upbringing, which then I think has contributed to some of the subtleties of my coaching and some of the skills that I converted into coaching, I suppose, and learned along the way. But I went on, I was from a country town and I was a pretty decent player I was a big fish in a small pond, growing up. I was talented, and my brother Brian, he'd gone off to Sydney and played some NRL, it was ARL in those days, played a few games, some games for South Sydney and some games for St George, but then went into coaching at a really early age. He was a school teacher, PE teacher, coached a famous rugby league team in Australia, a schoolboys team called James Cook High, and they toured the UK a few times. So some people out there will remember James Cook High, and some talented players have come through that. And he was coach of them first, and then he got into grade and became the youngest ARL coach. I think he was 29 when he took over Illawarra Steelers. So I had this big brother to look up to and watch and observe and follow. I was still very young at that stage, so that probably added to the fuel to my fire and desire to go on. I wanted to be a rugby league player, and I was fortunate enough and just good enough, because as I said, I was a big fish in a small pond. I went down to the big pond in Sydney, and I was a very small fish. Talent-wise, there were just so many more players that were so much more talented than me. I was very limited as a player, but I think I had some smarts, and I often say this when I talk to people about my career. I think I was coaching way before I retired as a player. I worked out fairly early, and I was pretty realistic about my own abilities. I wasn't big and fast and strong and not overly skillful. I could kick all right. I wasn't a bad kicker, left foot kicker, and I could tackle all right, but I could talk to people and get people to respond, and sometimes that'd be in a positive way and sometimes in an encouraging way, and sometimes I'd give somebody a serve if I thought they needed it. But I tried to do all those things at the right time. Of course, what I'd worked out is if I get the people around me to play well, I look a bit better. And it was necessary because, through my career, just to give you an idea of my playing career, played 6 years for Illawarra and 4 years for St George. In about half and half, maybe a little bit more in reserve grade than I was in first grade. So first team and second team. So I was in and out. I was used to being dropped. I wasn't always picked in the first team. I had to be at my best to get picked in the first team. Or I had to get people around me to play really well to make me look good so I could stay in the first team. So I think I was coaching long before I actually retired. I learned how to get the most out of and best out of people around me.
Well, that captain, Kevin Sinfield, in 2004 talks about a very similar story of being a young kid in an underdog team playing, I think, for Oldham, and realised he needed everybody in this game to play well, and that just stuck with him. Rising tide lifts all the boats, right? And it's great listening to you there, certainly about listening and observing how you learnt those skills on a farm. I remember being on Abbey Fields where we used to train, and I got distracted by some trains coming back, and I remember you telling me, giving me a bit of a dressing down. When I'm talking, I want you to burn your eyes into me, and it's something that's stuck with me ever since. And those little visual cues are huge body language and understanding the way people are thinking, feeling, certainly in sport as well. So you mentioned Illawarra Steelers there. You've been playing some big games. We've gone final in 1993 there for St George against a mad Brisbane side with some legends in there. He'd have been opposite Kevin Walters at the time, but just looking at Nathan Brown, Mick Potter played in that as well. People who ended up over in Super League and ended up coaches under your brother Brian there. Just tell me a bit about that influence in that team and why you think so many of those guys ended up with that Brian Smith brand of Rugby League over in Super League.
Yeah, I think he's had a huge influence on many, not just that St George team, not just that 92 and 93. It was 92 and 93 that were consecutive grand finals, both against Brisbane Broncos. Wayne Bennett coached Broncos, and they beat us both times. I've never watched them either one of those games ever since. I've never watched them. It's just something. I don't watch a whole lot of old footage because I don't like watching myself very much. Too critical of how crap I was as a player, and a bit embarrassed about it. But I was fortunate enough to be part of that crew, and we were a pretty good team for a couple of years. Not good enough to win the big game, but that was the only time I really got to play in a top team. Yeah. And Brian was my coach. Brian Smith was my coach, and once again, half the time I was in reserve grade, half the time I was in first grade. And we worked pretty well together. He was probably as critical of me as I was too. And because he was my brother, I probably had to work extra hard to get there too. I didn't want, and he certainly didn't give me any leg ups. That wasn't part of it, and people around recognised that too. That played along beside. They recognised that he wasn't going to do any favours just because we were related. He was a pretty hard taskmaster, but he had a huge influence on many of us, many of his players for many years. He nurtured people. He'd nurture people as to become coaches, to be better people. But he was hard working, very demanding. I just think he opened so many of our eyes to what it takes to be a coach too. Not all good. A lot of the stuff was great, and some of the stuff just suited his personality. It's not stuff that I would necessarily do. There's some things that in styles that he used that weren't appropriate for me, and I learnt that from him as well. Because there's so many different ways to coach and styles of leading people, and you've got to find what's true for you as a leader and as a coach, and that was drummed into all of us as well. None of us were trying to be like Brian Smith, but we learnt from Brian Smith. Sure, and so many of us, have been lucky enough to do that, and Trent Robinson's another one that come through, or there's Daniel Anderson and. Brad Arthur was part of the coaching setup at Parramatta under Brian Smith, and I'm sure Brad would tell you that Brian would have had an influence. He was just one of those sort of personalities that had an influence over a whole club, but everybody within it, usually in a pretty positive way. But for those of us who wanted to go on to coach and got an opportunity to coach along beside him, it was fascinating, an eye-opener, and I also had the privilege of a bit different to most other people. I got to see it away from the training ground and the ground as well. I got to see it develop, him develop. Yeah. Some of his mistakes along the way. Not that it means that you won't make the same mistakes, but I got an inside sort of view of it because I was related to him, and I got to see behind the scenes as well. So, and it gave me a great insight into what it takes to become a good coach. Yeah. And very grateful for that sort of influence. Pardon me. There was one other man, and I'm going to mention him. He's passed away now. He of motor neurone disease as well. He was a school teacher, ex-school teacher that worked for Brian, and he was a very, very big part of my development as a coach as well. And Max Ninnis was his name, and he he just had so many little gems of things that really resonated with me. He wasn't everybody's ideal coach. You know, some of the players didn't necessarily connect with him that well, but he certainly did with me, and he gave me some great insights into, you know, how to work with young people and get them to think about their game. And I'm referring this a little bit because I think if you recall, after each game that you'd play, one of the first questions on first training session was, what did you think about your game? Not what I thought. Yeah. I needed to know what you thought first of all, and I got some of that from Max. If I asked you that first, that means that you needed to have thought about what had happened.
Yep.
You had needed to reflect on your performance, and it gave me an insight into what you thought, and before I could give you my opinion, whether those two opinions matched up or not. Because sometimes I might say, well, how did you go, Jonesy? And you go, I thought I was super, coach. And I'd go, right, okay. So I then know how to then attack this, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas if I went in and went, I thought you had a stinker, Jonesy, and you thought you had a blinder, we were just going to hit it in the wrong direction with each other. So I learned some of those sort of little things, but they're really big things that stuck with me from Max. And you know, Max, I'm very grateful to have spent some time. He was a big influence. Brian Smith and he were probably the two biggest influences on my coaching career that I just took some gems from.
It's making me giggle because the opposite is true as well, in that I remember having some shockers, like thinking, oh, this review is going to be nasty. And you make me look like a superhero at review and point out maybe the one thing I did well. And so you don't go away too discouraged as well. There was always this balance within that.
Yeah, and you know, I was trying to be humorous there slightly. Because most of the time when I ask players, most of us as human beings, most of us, not everybody, but are usually self-critical.
Yeah.
Professional sports people out there think professional sports people are just full of themselves and, you know, full of confidence and never have, you know, any doubt in themselves. It's quite the opposite.
Yeah.
It's quite the opposite. You know, so many players and people within sport, so self-critical. And normally when I'd ask any of the players, and yourself included, what did you think? The first thing that'd come out of your mouth would be what you did wrong.
Yeah.
Honestly. And a lot of it, because, you know, often you go over and over and you just concentrate on the negatives. And, you know, one of the things that I tried to do and mostly did was, yeah, okay, good that you acknowledge what you needed to improve, but hey, come on. You find the victories, find the positives, find the development, find the what you did well, find what improved, and get into a positive mindset to get ready for the next bit. Yeah, we've got to do some work on this, and we're not going to sweep it under the carpet. You know, some of what you've already mentioned, we need to address that. But please, you know, don't put all your focus on the negative stuff. Otherwise, you just stay down here all the time working on this, and you forget about some of the stuff that actually got you to where you're at. And some of that happened in my career at different stages. You know, I probably got a little bit of influence from people of, you can't do that, so don't try. And I didn't want that from my players. I didn't want to be that coach. I wanted to be the coach who went, come on, you can have a go at that, train for it, try it in training. Let's see if we can develop that aspect of your game so you can then put it into your performance. And I didn't want to be that coach that said, you can't do something.
Yeah.
I wanted you guys to, you know, have the confidence, but not just go out and try things off the top of your head. Go and work at it and then incorporate it into your performance. And, you know, so I'd like to think most of the time I was pretty positive in that respect and would try and lift you guys, you know, most of the time.
It was exhilarating, it was good, it was fresh, kept me always thinking. Some real sort of contrasts of methods as well. I remember playing all kinds of crazy games where you just change the rules. you'd change the rules to make us think differently and understand everybody else's position as well. Play out of position, stand off for a game, just so you can understand what that means. Just reflecting then, Tony, this is a deep question before we get back to you maybe coming over playing at Workington in the inaugural Super League year. Leadership and coaching, are they two different things? Because we put them all under the same bracket, but for me there's a distinct difference. An ability to understand the X's and the O's, where to kick a ball, where to kick it, but actually, how much of that do you actually need to know to be able to win trophies?
You need to know a fair bit of that, but it's getting the right mix of that, Jonesy. I think, good coaches are good leaders.
Yeah,
there's no doubt about that. But there needs to be good leadership, and you can do leadership without coaching too. So they can incorporate each other, and then they can be separated from each other, I think. But to be a good coach, you've got to be a good leader. And there's so many different ways to lead and so many different ways to coach as well. It's an aspect of, I'm fascinated about the different styles and different ways to lead. There's so many different ways, I mentioned it earlier, to be a good leader. There's some ways to be a bad leader too. There's so many ways. So I'm not saying every aspect or every way of leading is a good one. And some work better than others, but different approaches by different personalities. I know some great coaches who are, very much tell people exactly what they've got to do, and that's it, boom, and it works for them, and it pulls. They're able to pull that off. Whereas I'm probably more of that. What do we all think about that? Or hey, here's a direction we could go. I think this would be a good one, but do you want to go that way, or do you want to go in a different direction? And get a bit of buy-in and sell things to the group, and get the group's opinion. Sometimes what I've learned as a coach and as a leader, sometimes some of the people that you're coaching know a whole lot more than you in some aspects of it. And I tapped into some of that at Leeds too, and at different places I coach, because as I said to you, I wasn't the most talented of player myself. I've coached so many more players that are better than what I was. I'd be crazy not to use their knowledge and their vision and their reading of a game, because I couldn't do it in the same way they could. So I'd be mad not to tap into that. So it's fascinating. I'm getting the right balance of all that coaching and leadership and dictatorship, and there'll be times where, you'll recall maybe that I would have to say, no, we're just going this way. Yeah. We all just need to buy in. Sometimes we all need somebody to just tell us where to go, not ask a question as well. If you've just got a coach who is always asking questions, well, then you get sick of coming up with the answers. Sometimes you just want to follow somebody, and you guys were pretty good at getting the right mix. But we had some fantastic leadership, and it wasn't just Kevin. Kevin was honestly, if I was ever to set up, and I talk about this ever since I've coached him, if I was ever to set up a club and he'd be the person, one of the first persons I'd get, and I'd get him in as the captain of the club, because he was fantastic at it. But he learnt along the way. Yeah. And what he was so good at was getting other leaders around him to help him become a good leader and to lead the team. He wasn't just out in front and dictating, and you've known it, you saw it, and he allowed other people within the group to have a voice and have an opinion, and he'd follow them sometimes. And I think that's what good leaders do. And I'd like to think that at times that's what I did with my players. I followed them when they were fine, and I often talk about it when I was here at Leeds Rhinos, and some occasions I'd come in at half time and just listen to you guys in the dressing room and go, yep, I agree. and walk out the door. They were my best half-time talks.
Yep.
They were, because you guys had it under control. You knew what was going on. But it wasn't just the leader. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just Kevin. There was a number of people, and everybody ended up being a leader of some sort.
Amen. Good creators. Good leaders create good leaders.
They do.
Absolutely. I love listening to it. It just reaffirms a lot of what I've been thinking, believing. Talk to you about that all day. Take me back to working in 1996, I believe. Living above a fish shop. Some famous stories in there. Finishing off your playing days. What was that experience like? What do you remember?
I'd retired. I'd retired from playing at St George. ARL and Super League war broke out in Australia. Money getting thrown everywhere. A big split in the sport.
Yeah.
England signed up to Super League. I was going to coach at St George, my club, but went down to Adelaide Rams.
Yes.
Adelaide Rams came over here, played Leeds Rhinos, got beaten on the Headingley by Leeds Rhinos. That team got disbanded when the war went to court, and I was a young, not long retired player down in Adelaide, no team to coach because all the players had gone back to all their old clubs. It was bizarre. So I'm down in Adelaide, and Brian was over here coaching at Bradford Bulls, and he said, there's an Aussie coach up in Workington, Ross O'Reilly, doing it tough at the moment. They're doing it real tough. What about you chuck your boots on and jump on a plane and come over and instead of just sitting down in Adelaide, not being able to coach anybody. And so I went, yeah, okay, yeah. I was on full pay down in Adelaide. I could have just stayed there. My wife and I could have just stayed there happily and had an extra long holiday. But my brother sort of suggested that I go up and play at Workington. So I went up there and, oh my goodness, what a culture shock. For those people out there who've been to Adelaide, it's a beautiful city, lovely city. A lot of al fresco eating and nice restaurants and, just real nice, casual, good weather. And then we go to Workington. It was just, oh my goodness. And listen, I reflect on it and met some lovely people, but at that point in time, Workington wasn't the hub of excitement, I can tell you, in terms of towns. It was pretty down and out, and it was a big culture shock for my wife and I. And they got me a flat, and it was above a fish and chip shop. And the day we moved in, we had fish and chips, and that was the last day we had fish and chips.
I'm going to ask that question.
Oh man!
Al fresco to fish and chips in there.
It was such a culture shock for us. It was tough work, and I joke about it, but it was pretty much true. You'd be walking home from training, and the local cats and dogs would be following me because it smelled like fish and chips. All my clothes, the whole thing come up through the roof and the ceiling. But I think we won 3 games that season.
Right.
It was hard work, and it wasn't an enjoyable part of my career. Wasn't a great way to finish it off. My mind probably, I probably wasn't. I should have retired. I should have just stayed retired. I broke my wrist second game over here, so got here, second game in, out for 6 weeks, miserable. So I knew it helped me for later on, because I knew what a whinging Aussie was when they came over, when everything's not the same as what it is back in Australia, because I lived it. And I was that Aussie for a while that was going, this isn't as good as where I've come from. So it helped me help other Australians when they came over to settle in. And I've had a fair few Australians come over and not be able to settle real quickly, pardon me. And I'd have to suggest to them that, listen, if you're better off and you can't get on with this, you're better off going home, Yeah. There's no point in coming over here and just comparing everything to where you've come from, because it's different. It's different. And you either embrace it and get on with it, make the most of it, which most of them do. But it's tough in their first year usually. You'll have seen enough come through, and how much they talk about where they come from and how much they, in doing the price comparison, and this isn't as good as that. And, I was that person for a little while. So it actually helped me understand it when it happened with players that I coached many years later. So that's why I'm grateful for the experience. The other reason I'm grateful for the experience of living in Workington is when I got the opportunity to come back and coach in England. My wife and I both knew wherever we'd end up was going to be better than Workington. No disrespect to the people in Workington who are up there listening, but honestly, we knew being down in West Yorkshire along that sort of pocket or the M62 corridor was going to be a whole lot better than living, and it was very remote up there, and we felt very isolated. So it helped us make a different sort of settlement the second time. We knew what we were getting into, and we knew it was going to be better, and it was.
Just listening there, the reflection on the resilience that you would have built through some of the scenarios you found yourself in, but always having an optimistic mindset in that I'm here to learn, I'm here to understand, and then therefore I'm going to feed that information forward to people coming in. And then having that opportunity at Huddersfield, who at the time weren't doing great, ended up in Championship. You've just said they paid for your flight over, they're going through turmoil. It's a long-winded process before you end up going through a season unbeaten to get promoted again.
Yeah, it was a fascinating part of my career and one I'm very grateful for. It was. I was coaching at Parramatta. We were just coming into the semi-finals, and former teammate of mine, Jeff Hardy, who played at Huddersfield. He was Sheffield Eagles, and then they amalgamated, and Jeff Hardy was at Sheffield Eagles, and he recommended me to them and rang me up and recommended me to put in for coaching of Huddersfield Giants. So made an filled out an application. The process was brilliant. I'm talking the end of 2000 it was. I had to do an application, had to do a psychometric test. And had to do a mock salary cap and recruitment form. It was most in-depth application for rugby league that I'd ever come across, which impressed me. It impressed me. I saw where they were on the bottom of the table, and they had been for the previous 3 seasons or 2 seasons, and only just missed out on relegation, through the team coming up, couldn't qualify, or the amalgamation between Sheffield. That saved them from going down. So I was really impressed by the manner in which and what they were going through to get the right person. But I was doing my interviews over the phone, and I said to them, and with the blessing of my brother, I said to him, listen, I'm at a disadvantage here, and coaching's all about eye to eye, face to face, and selling of yourself. And there wasn't Skype, and there wasn't Zoom, and there wasn't, FaceTime, and all those things in those days. So the only option was jump on a plane. So I said to him, I think I'm at a disadvantage here. If I jumped on a plane and come over, I could be there on Tuesday. Can I do an interview, face-to-face interview? If you don't want me, I'll go back. If you do, I'll stay on and coach for the rest of the season. So it was a real weird part of my life because we're just heading into the semis in Parramatta. I'd been an assistant coach there for a couple of years, and we're just getting to the exciting bit. But with the encouragement from Brian to go, I think you're ready, to fly the nest and become a head coach. Pardon me. He encouraged me to. So I did. I bought bought a ticket over. I had to buy a return ticket because you're not allowed in the country on a one-way. I wasn't that confident. I had to have a trip home booked. But I carried a suitcase over, and that was going to have to do me until, if I got the job, until the family came over. 3-year-old son, 18-month-old daughter at home. So I jumped on the plane, all my team, all my fellow coaches and players that I coached at Parramatta, I went, see ya. I might see you on Wednesday or Thursday, or I might not. It was literally that. And it was a weird feeling, saying goodbye to people, but I might have been back and coaching for the rest of the season. So anyway, we came over, did the interview, and got the job that day. They picked me up at the airport and interviewed, got the job. So I had to ring my wife and say, pack up the house.
Yeah, it's on.
It's on. You're coming over. Bring the kids. Hey, got a job over here. She had a big job to do. 6 weeks later, she arrived over. Wow. After she had to sell the cars and do all the things that I got out of doing, and I got on to do the stuff that I love doing. She wears the brunt of it every time, but it was a weird experience. The reason why I say about I never got the I assumed if I got the job, the club would go, I'll pay for your flight, we'll look after you there. Never happened. I'm going, yeah, but it was worth it. It was worth it. But Jonesy, we lost the last. I took over with 2 or 3 games to go, I think, and there wasn't really my team. It gave me a chance to have a look at what the club was doing, where they're at, etc. We go into next season. So bearing in mind this is my first season as a head coach, we would have lost the first 15 games.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a while. It was, and it was a great. It was. I say it's great, and it was. It made us strong. It made me strong as a leader. It also reaffirmed some of what I believe in, and I didn't get under any pressure from anybody, on whether it was the board, the crowd, anybody. I got no stick from anybody. Of course, they could see the team was getting better.
Yeah.
People were developing. Not good enough to win. We didn't get the wins. Yeah. But they were getting better, and that's what I believe in. My job as a coach is to get the teams better.
What are they seeing there when they're seeing people get better? Because they're quite, a lot of people struggle to see past the result at the end of the game. What is it that they're seeing?
Efforts.
Right.
Efforts mainly.
Yeah.
I think people recognise effort and application and desire, and I think most true rugby league supporters put that higher than the result. Yeah, I think most of us can handle people trying their best and just coming up short sometimes, but trying their best. I think there's some people out there that only look for the W's and L's. And don't get me wrong, us coaches and me as a coach, I get judged on whether my teams win or lose, mostly, but I think we were getting judged because the people of Huddersfield and the Giants were used to losing games. I think they were just happy to see improvement and a culture change, coming. It wasn't overnight and it didn't happen straight away, but it was coming, and I think they could see that was coming. There was a change in the way players went about their business and the club went about their business, so we had an influence and lost the first 15. First point was against London Broncos, draw, 1 point, and I will never forget it was like winning the grand final. The players on the field, they just, because we didn't get beat and they got a draw. It was like, but we did an interesting exercise after that. That was first half of the season. Second half of the season, we had our own table in the gym that we put up, and we kept record. We disregarded the first half of the season, 13 games. We got rid of them. Okay, so then we did our own table. For the second half of the season, we came 6th in Super League.
Right, wow, right.
6th, yeah. So we had a significant back end of the year. We ended up getting relegated. It was a year that Wakefield got docked 4 points. They protested and got docked 2 points, so they stayed up and we went down. And that was fine. And it was a good opportunity for us to probably clean out the club and some contracts that we had that probably needed to be, terminated or renegotiated in different terms. And but it was an opportunity for us to somewhat start afresh, and develop our own culture again and a better culture. And you're right. The following season, we went down into the Premiership, Northern Forward Premiership it was called that year, and we went through unbeaten. We had a draw against Whitehaven. Paul Cullen was coach at the time. We had a draw against them, but every other game we won. And I can tell you right now, I didn't enjoy that year near as much as I enjoyed the first year.
That's interesting.
It is interesting. It is, and most people would think about that it was a pretty miserable place if you've lost 15 straight. As a leader, and it taught me how to lead. If I was to go in on a Monday, what did they want to see? What did my players want to see? If I'm the leader of the group, did they want to see me all grumbly and angry, or did they want to see me upbeat and ready to go and ready for this week's challenge? And it taught me to lead. It taught me to lead in adversity, and it isn't all about the winning. And what it also taught me to do and reinforced what I believe in is find the wins within the losses. So there were some guys who were improving dramatically, and they were wins. We weren't getting a win on, in League Express, and they weren't getting their names put in there for good reasons. But instead of missing 6 tackles, each week, they were down to 4 tackles. So that's a victory. That was better. And we had to instill more belief into the players that they could compete and they could do it. And we got to a stage where we did, and that's why I mentioned that second half of the season about coming 6th. They got a belief in themselves. They started to beat teams who had been beating them all through earlier in the season. So, yeah, it was a great year. I'm also going to say I probably have as many phone calls from players of that first year that still pick up the phone and contact me. Close relationship development through that adversity as any year I've ever coached. I had one coming home from a game last season, that I haven't spoken to for 24 years. Ring me up and, wanted to re-engage, and that's unreal. It was great.
I mean, it must be the satisfaction for you when you get the most fulfilment. I think that's where I talk about it a lot, the refiner's fire, where we are forged, our characters grow. Unfortunately, not enough people are willing to go through that length of adversity and that much pain to see the fruits at the end of it. And I'm even listening to you there. Now, how do you for those out there, I think I understand it because I've had adversity myself, but how do you keep believing in what you're doing? You've already sort of touched on it because you've seen them incremental gains in people, and eventually it'll get there. Unfortunately, sport isn't patient enough usually.
Agree.
To get to that bell curve where there's that upward lift.
Yeah, I agree. I was fortunate. I was fortunate, and I had some really good people that I was working for at the time and supporting me within the Giants setup. Because, the easy thing would have been after 5 or 6 games that get rid of the new coach, and that would have been really easy for him to do. So it's hard. It's hard. To get the right people to work for and the right mentality and them to understand and also, not listen to the masses. Not that there was that big a support back then for the Giants, but there certainly wasn't social media like it is now. It's even harder now, I think, for any of the organisations, sporting organisations, to switch off to some of the support base or fan base.
For sure.
I think it makes it much tougher to go through those periods of adversity and stick tight and stick to what they probably should do to ride through. I think with chopping and changing, you're starting all over again, and you've seen it. It's so difficult to start to create culture. I talk about it. I ended up being at Warrington Wolves for 9 years. I can remember doing a talk at a football pro licensing talk for the football fraternity, and it was on developing and winning culture. And I went, well, I've been at Warrington Wolves for 5 years now, and I just think it's starting to get good now. 5 years in. Yeah. It takes time. It really does. And often coaches and coaching staff don't get enough time to actually establish that good culture. They're moved on unless it's immediate. And like most things, things that happen quickly don't last usually. And that's why I'm also very recognise that when I came to the Rhinos, so many good things had happened prior to me getting here. That's why we were able to do it quickly when I got here.
Well, Gary Vinton obviously sort of seen something in your potential yourself, Brian at Dermot as well. I'm cognizant of the fact that Brian, is that all right? I'm cognizant of the fact that Brian was a part of who you were, your team, when you come. And it's funny because the second chapter of the Leeds Rhinos journey, the sort of back end as we were getting older, Brian was obviously steering that as head coach at the time.
Yep.
So just tell us that desire to come to Leeds, how that came about, and what the attraction and then the opportunity to come to a club. And I'm very biased, obviously. I've grown up here supporting it since I was 9 years old. But in the context of Rugby League, it's a big club and a great opportunity for somebody like yourself at that time.
Yeah. Well, there's probably a couple of aspects to it. It was a year I was in the championship, in the Northern Forward Championship, that I'd known Gary for some time, not closely, but only met him a couple of times. He knew my brother reasonably well, and so I knew Gary to say hello to, and that was about it. But he contacted me during that period that I was at. We were in the Northern Forward Premiership, and then he inquired as to whether I'd have any interest in coming and joining the coaching staff at the end of the season, and it was very nice to have that sort of interest, but it wasn't to become a head coach.
Right.
It was to join the staff, and I was second year into being a head coach, and I was enjoying it, and I wanted to be head coach. I'd done an apprenticeship. I'd done a best part of 4 years as a assistant coach. So I didn't want to step back from being that to being an assistant to somebody else. So it was a nice conversation, but he was just showing some interest, and so that happened, and then I got to we got back promoted to Huddersfield, and we went up and we finished. I think we ended up finishing 9th that year, and I was off contract. We got up to 6th at one point on our comeback year, but we ended up losing a few games and ended up 9th. So we consolidated, in our first year back up. So pretty good, really. And but I had conversations about not my contract, but about how much we were going to spend
Right.
at the club at Huddersfield. yeah, about, and because we were on a fairly small budget at that stage, and I was coming to the end of my contract, and I sort of went, well, we'll park that part of it. If we're going to compete better than what we have been, we need to spend more. Now, Ken Davey, who a very generous man, has put a lot of money into that club for many, many years. He was in the process of pretty much saving the football team at the time too. He put in a whole lot to help them out. So he was fairly well stretched. I mean, he'd already put significant amount in for us, and he was trying to hold up the football, which was probably a little bit out of his means, but he was doing it because he's such a, Huddersfield person, in terms of his heart and his investment. So they weren't going to increase the salary cap, and I just said, well, the whole idea was after this year we were going to increase them. I can't afford to have another relegation on my CV, and I think that could happen if we keep spending what we had a pretty good year, but we're lucky to get there. I don't know whether we could do it again. So I decided that I wouldn't renew my contract. That was kind of it.
So that job interview then, the task where you had to go through the salary cap, it come back to bite him in the end.
Yeah.
There's a reason why you left as well.
Yeah, it was. We didn't get to negotiate my. Some people thought, I left for more money, or Leeds had approached me. Pardon me. I've had a bad flu for the last couple of weeks, so apologies. So we, people, the Huddersfield crew supporters thought I left because Leeds had either, approached me, and absolutely none of that. It was all about the salary cap, and it was just the circumstance. I understood Ken's circumstances, but I just didn't want to have 2 relegations on my CV. I knew that if one relegation back up, have another relegation, that was going to be, me off into the abyss somewhere, and so I just said no. I'll look around. So I started to look around, and I didn't have an agent at the time, but tried to put my name about a bit, and there was just no jobs. There was just nothing going on. So there was still 6 weeks to go in the season that year, and so 6 weeks to go. No jobs. We're looking like, I was saying to my wife, well, you better pack up the house again, and we might be heading back to Oz. Then right at the end of it, I got this call out of the blue from Gary Etherington, and he said, can I come out to your place? And he and Darryl Powell came out, and Darryl was the coach at the time, and they both came out. And the plan was, and it was very open then, and still is now. They sat in my lounge, in my dining room at the dining room table, and went, the plan is, Darryl will step aside for 2 years, go and develop, and he'll take over again in 2 years' time. You come in, head coach for 2 years, end of 2 years, that's it, you're done. Would you accept that? I'll bite your hand off, Gary, for the opportunity. And so the 3 of us sat around my dining room table and discussed that. And so it was right at, it saved us from having to pack up and go back to Australia. And but it really did get down to the last minute.
We touched on 2004, instant success, great year there, and finished top as well, which is notable. Won a grand final. 2005, we're celebrating 20 years of that. It's coming up soon. World Club Challenge. When we entered this room today, he said that he'd watched it and reflected for the first time. What did you see, if anything, that was new or reminded of those special days, winning against Canterbury Bulldogs at Ellen Road? And I remember, I'll never forget, because it was funny listening, 1993, Tina Turner sang at that grand final.
Yes.
And I remember Tina Turner being quite an instrumental figurehead for NRL, Rugby League, the Australian Rugby League. And then after that game, the Queen song come on, "We Are the Champions," and I remember you reflecting afterwards and saying to boys in team rooms, "You are the champions of the world." Like, I could start crying now, like as a player fan, like just hearing that at Ellen Road, Fallage Rhinos, like the best. What did you see in that game when you look back?
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't go back and watch games. So honestly, I'm not one to reminisce. I'm not one to, sit there and watch. I know they have reruns on Sky regularly, and I'll just skip over them. And if they're even my, teams that I've coached, I just don't do it. I review games afterwards, and always reviewed the grand final, straight afterwards. But it's just not my idea of pleasure, sitting there reminiscing about it. So because you mentioned to me it was a bit about that today, I jumped onto one of those apps and downloaded it and watched it today. And my wife was sort of walking backwards and forwards and, I've forgotten that and forgot that. So much of it just, for instance, I knew it got close by the end of it. I'd forgotten that there was a field goal involved. Kevin kicked his field goal and with a couple of minutes to go, and just to put it up to seven points for 2 scores. But there was so many things within it that I just, I hadn't thought about and didn't remember. But it was fascinating. I enjoyed it to some degree. It was just the amount of offloads and the, not openness, but at times it was frantic, and it was, some of the rugby league was brilliant to watch.
Yes,
it was a cold, sloppy, hard to play night, but some of the skills that were on show were good too. Were very good. But I saw some of that stuff of people backing themselves as well, and at times, probably pushing it a bit far, but and the impact that it had on me, you started up and you did a good job, and I took you off after about 20, I think, and probably missed you for a while, because what we'd had on the bench was Barry Mack, Ali Lauatiti, Willie Poaching and Rob Burrow. Yeah. All fantastic attacking players mainly attacking players. So when they came on, they really lifted us in an attack. But when it came to some of the hard work and some of the graft that, Jonesy was known for and a couple of the others were known for, we probably, we're missing some of that as well. But it was really good to watch. Sonny Bill Williams, 19-year-old. He was the world's best player that year, at 19-year-old, and he showed it in that game. It was good to reminisce. I won't do it regularly, but
nothing. It's interesting. I'm giggling and laughing at you having to download it on the app. I bet everybody thinks that we've all got these libraries where we store it and watch it every weekend. But they are special times, and I'm just thinking, Sonny Bill, they just dusted everybody up that game, and we've got some funny stories. But 2005 was a really interesting year because we started off world champions, and I think back now, 10 years later, we did the treble. In 2005, we weren't far off the treble that year. We had some massive scores, destroying teams. Finished second in league, lost in Challenge Cup final, lost in grand final. So you're this far from doing all three. In fact, 4. We'd have had 4 if it probably weren't quite there yet. But how frustrating was that as a coach, knowing the potential and just falling short?
Yeah, but that's the test. Listen, I played in 2 grand finals and come up short. I don't get frustrated with it.
Yeah,
it's all right. Take the lessons from it. Let's go try and do it next year. How do we learn from this? What do we take from it? We're pretty much, I think, what you're trying to say, and we're probably the most dominant team that year, but come up short when it counted. In the big games. I think when and this is the other part of that, when you're brought up in Australia, because there's always been a grand final, it's not first past the post, and in even Premier League, whoever comes top of the league is the best team. Well, the test of a grand final and a test of those big games, it's whether you can hold your nerve. You mightn't be the best team, and I'm dare to say, there's been times where you guys, and I mean the Rhinos, and particularly after I left, weren't the best team, but found a way to win those big matches. I love that, because that's where I come from. That's the sort of, you don't have to be the best all year, but you can end up being the champions.
Yes.
It shows some other aspects of your team's personality and your team's grit. So, I like that. But, 2005, I don't like the fact that we were probably the best team all year and come up short. So, but, once it happens, what can you do about it? Do you get miserable or you get frustrated? Frustration, I think, is the biggest crippler of anybody. When you get frustrated in whatever you do, if you let the frustration, you don't perform as well because your brain's getting angry and you're not positive. You're in a negative cycle. So, for me, it's right. Deal with it, analyse it, learn from it, get better from it. Next year, we're going to do it.
Love it. And we did learn how to deal with chaos, and that is what helped us to win so many more years later. You mentioned there you don't have to be great all year. Won it from fifth twice on that journey. I know you'd left by then, but that's what we were good at. And even the chaos you mentioned at Ellen Road, the free-flowing rugby league, the push through support, the reloading, the bleep test turns, all this vocabulary language was all part of our makeup for the next 10, 11 years, and it gave us a lot of success. I could talk to you literally all day. We could talk about Warrington, we could talk about you both old clubs, the way that you feel about rugby league now, what you're doing now. But I'd like to sort of wrap up with Brian McDermott, because I think 2005 was the year he left to go to London and start his own journey as a head coach. I remember him being really emotional, telling us that he was going at the changing rooms. He got into tears, and always an emotional guy. But you spoke about your satisfaction and gratification coming from developing people. So what was it like seeing him go off to cut his own teeth?
Yeah, he was an interesting one as well. He wasn't straightforward. He's never straightforward, Brian Mac. I love him to bits, and he's different, And he retired. He retired from Bradford Bulls. I've got to tell you how he came about.
Yeah.
He retired at Bradford Bulls, and he had an opportunity to stay there. But because he was coached by Brian Smith, and Brian Smith had a reasonably big influence on him early in his career, he came to Huddersfield Giants with me. He wanted to cut his ties a bit. He'd been there for so long. Not that he didn't have love for the club. He loved. It was hard for him to leave Bradford Bulls, but he just felt like he had to step away to enter the next part of the next chapter. And when he came to me, he didn't know whether he was going to go down the conditioning lines or the coaching lines. He didn't know. And I went, mate, come and help me out here at Huddersfield, and you can decide. You can decide along the way, or you can develop both aspects as you go, and down the track you can decide. So I reckon he was there probably about 5 or 6 weeks coaching with us. But what a fantastic recruit to get, that could have stayed at a very big club, and he decided to come to us at Huddersfield. We'd just gone through that Northern Forward Premiership undefeated year, and he came on board the last year I was at Huddersfield. So to choose us and come and work with me, I was over the moon, and gave him an opportunity to find himself as well, and away from his old club. And it was a really smart decision and a brave decision for him. But it was probably about 5 or 6 weeks in that he came to me and he said, Smithy, I want to be a coach. I'll still do some stuff in the conditioning, and he did some stuff with the boxing, and he still do that today. He always fancied himself. He was going to be the heavyweight boxer and champion of the world again, Mac. And I didn't doubt him, and I wasn't going to argue with him either. But he come aboard, and yeah, it was interesting. Really worked really well together. It was his first year here was tough. It was tough to get him here. I had to beg, borrow, and crawl, and do whatever I could to get him here, because there wasn't a whole lot of change. As I said to you, there was Marcus By come in, and myself, and there wasn't going to be much change in the coaching setup. We had a couple of assistant coaches who were going to remain there. So, if my memory serves me right, Brian but to get him involved with the first team, he coached the under-19s, I think, in the first year that he was here. I wanted him full-time with us, but there wasn't a spot. So in order for him to come across, he had to do both, and it was a pretty big year for him, because, work-wise, to do the two is a big job, and he spent a lot of time putting everything he could into the 19s, but as much time as he could with us as well. So Mac, watching him develop, and we had he was great, because he challenged me, and he'd give me his thoughts. He was a strong enough man to, throw in his ideas, and then sometimes he's also a strong enough man to go, no, I prefer to go that way, or I was wrong, or you're wrong. He's good. He's good like that, and we got on very well in as coaches, and we worked very, very well together, I think, and had some good successes. So for him then to go on to become a head coach, that was all part of the journey. That was, and just as I'd been developed by Brian Smith and other coaches, and Max Ninnis, and had helped me develop, I hope in a little way I helped Brian develop, and it was always going to be the case that he'd go on and be a highly successful coach, which he did, and it made me extremely proud. And I look back on that period of time as being very grateful for what he contributed to me becoming a better coach too. And he gave me as much as I gave him, that's for sure.
This could easily be a two-part of this, Tony. I've not even scratched the surface of where I'd like to go, but just wrap it up for me. 2007's end of your time at Leeds. Started with a grand final win, finished with a grand final win. Remember the Scotty Donald try, and you're in the crowd, you're giving it this. It was the year that I first grew the beard. I loved that kit because it was really dark. I scored a try, and it was just a wonderful sort of end to your period here in time at the Rhinos. Just your time up here, and certainly that grand final in note. Yeah,
it wasn't. We weren't the strongest team that year either, by a long shot. We'd had some, some average results at different stages, if my memory serves me. But to go out like that and finish like that, was pinch myself a bit of a fairy tale ending to some terrific relationships built, that really, I was pleased for everybody that we could finish in such a positive way and pull together and achieve something pretty special to finish with as well during my time. I had no doubt that you guys were going to continue to do some of that. I don't ever have regrets about some of those decisions, because at that point in time I was ready for a different challenge, and I thought the GB and England thing would be a good step for me. On reflection, it probably wasn't. In terms of how much time you got to coach. I missed the week to week, day to day, the relationship building. I really missed that whilst I was doing that job, because you got to coach about 3 or 4 games a year, whereas I'd been with you guys, and each week, most weeks, except for about 6 weeks that you have off at the end of the season, and almost every day and developing relationships, and some of them, you know, really strong bonds with people, and you see the, you know, development of me and my relationships with people, and yeah, I missed it, and you know, a few years later after I did that, I must say, I was looking at you guys going, I'm not sure I made...
Created a monster.
I'm not sure, I went, I'm not sure I made the right decision.
Right.
You know, that, but I'm sure it was for the club, but for me personally, I probably should have, you know, I ended up staying 9 years at Warrington, but I sort of looked back and I went, I should have stretched out a few more with the Rhinos, you know, but you know, there's some of the things that you don't have regrets, but you sort of consider, did I do the right thing there, and you know, should I have stayed a bit longer and enjoyed not just the success, it was, you know, what we created as a culture was the real winner, I think, you know, within the place. It wasn't whether we won the trophies, it was more about the relationships that we'd developed with one another, and the trust and the bonds and the, you know, the ability to challenge as well. I'm just on it, you know, I didn't bring this up during any of but I'm going to, but you and Kevin are so close as friends. But I can remember you guys going at it in training, like on the verge of, you know.
Puppy dogs.
Yeah.
Biting, scratching, kicking.
But I loved it. Loved it because you loved each other, and you didn't cross the line, but you went right up to it, but you're forcing the best out of each other. And, you know, that's what good teammates do. So, it was a real pleasure to all that time. You know, I can honestly say that period of my career, I totally enjoyed.
Yeah, there'll be not a lot of people who understand this, but you'll get it in that even though you weren't here, you were certainly a deep part of the influence, certainly in me, in the habits that continued to get success, but was rooted in that period of time. And just reflecting as well, Great Britain, we haven't got time to touch on it now, but my Great Britain jersey means a great deal. I think we'd have played and you'd have coached the last Great Britain team to win a game, by the way.
That's right.
Interestingly enough, but
That's
it was a real special time. Tony, thanks for joining us in Box 2. I could go for another hour. In fact, I might do. I'm being selfish, but next year's 2025, we've got a lot to celebrate. 20 years, maybe we can join up, reminisce, get some of those guys, Gaz Ellis and some of those boys, Baz and Keith, and have a chat and do another Box 2. So, Tony, thank you very much, sir.
My pleasure.
To have you. Hope you'll join us next time.